Single dad. Tried to stop his son from inviting a crying woman. Home. Unaware he was saving the CEO. Sometimes all it takes is one small voice in a silent crowd to remind us we're still alive. Ototo, New York was cold that night. Not the kind of cold that brushed your skin and passed. This was the kind that clung, that sank into your bones and whispered, "You're alone, here." The wind cut through the subway tunnels like a knife, sharp and uncaring. People stood packed shoulder to shoulder on the platform of 96th Street Station, faces down, eyes glazed, minds somewhere far away. Nobody looked at each other. Nobody dared. Except one boy. His name was Ethan. 7 years old, wore a hoodie that had long since lost its color shoes with soles peeling at the back and a stubborn spark in his eyes that the world hadn't yet managed to crush. He stood holding tightly onto his father's hand, bouncing lightly on his toes, as if the darkness of the city didn't know how to touch him. Next to him was Caleb, tall, lean, a man worn at the edges. His jacket was a faded work coat, his knuckles red from the cold, and his eyes, oh, those eyes, they held stories too heavy for a child to carry. A man trying, failing, trying again. The train hadn't arrived yet. People groaned, checked their watches, cursed under their breath. Then Ethan let go of his father's hand. Before Caleb could stop him, the boy had walked toward the end of the platform where a lone woman sat on a metal bench, head bowed, body hunched, a curtain of golden hair hiding most of her face. She looked broken. Her makeup had smudged down her cheeks. Her coat, though elegant, looked too heavy for the frame beneath it. She wasn't crying loud, but the silence around her screamed. Everyone ignored her. Everyone but Ethan. He stopped right in front of her and asked, plain and curious, "Why are you crying?" She jumped, slightly startled, then turned her head slowly, clearly not expecting anyone to speak to her. Her mascara-streaked eyes widened at the boy. "I'm not crying," she said softly, brushing at her cheek. "Just thinking too hard." Ethan tilted his head. "My dad does that too. When he's sad, I tell him stories until he laughs again. Want me to tell you one?" The woman stared at him, blinking, almost confused. "Do you talk to strangers like this all the time?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "Only when I think they're about to do something really stupid." Her breath caught. Those words, innocent and raw, pierced something inside her that had been locked up for too long. Before she could respond, a voice rang out. Ethan Caleb pushed through the crowd, pulling his son gently but firmly back to his side. "You don't walk away from me like that, son," he said, low but serious. "We've talked about this." Ethan looked up at his father, then pointed to the woman. "But she's sad, Dad. Just like you used to be, when Mom left." That sentence hung in the air like a tremor. Caleb looked over at the woman, his gaze respectful but cautious. "I'm sorry," he said. "He can be perceptive in ways I wish he wasn't." The woman smiled faintly. "No need to apologize. He reminded me I'm still breathing." A silence settled between them. Then Ethan turned back to his father and whispered, "Can we share our soup with her?" Caleb hesitated. He was about to say no, but the woman stood up before he could. "Let me buy you both something," she said. "To say thank you." Caleb raised a brow. "That's not necessary." "It is," she replied quietly, "because 5 minutes ago I didn't plan on seeing tomorrow, and now I kind of want to know what soup tastes like when it's shared." He studied her face, vulnerable, sincere, and holding on by threads. "I suppose we can allow one meal," he said, then added gently, "as long as you let us return the favor someday." She smiled, truly smiled, and said, "My name's Ava." "Caleb," he replied, shaking her hand. "And this brave one is Ethan." Ava knelt down to Ethan's level. "Nice to meet you, little storyteller." He shook her hand like a gentleman and said seriously, "You know the best storytellers can save the world." She blinked, and something in her eyes shifted. For the first time in months, her heart stirred not from pain, but from something far rarer. Hope. Ooh, the diner wasn't much. A corner cafe with flickering neon and cracked vinyl seats. But inside was warmth, and that night it felt like a cathedral. The three of them sat by a window. Snow fell in soft flurries beyond the glass. Ava sipped slowly, hands wrapped around the cup. She watched the boy across from her devour his soup with comic enthusiasm, and the man next to him who observed everything but said little. It felt foreign and safe. "Do you live alone?" Ethan asked between bites. Ava hesitated. "I live with expectations. But yes, I'm alone." "That's sad," Ethan said. "It is," she agreed. He leaned forward. "You can stay with us. My dad's good at fixing things." Caleb choked on his drink. "Ethan." But Ava laughed, a sound that startled even herself. "You're the first person to invite me to live with them after knowing me for 10 minutes. Ethan grinned. "I do that sometimes." She turned to Caleb, wiping the corner of her eye with the back of her finger. "Do you believe one chance encounter can change a life?" He looked at her, his voice quiet but steady. "I believe miracles don't knock. They just wait for someone brave enough to pause." Their eyes met, and for a moment in that little diner surrounded by noise and neon, something deep and unspoken passed between them. Three strangers, one broken billionaire, one weary single dad, one 7-year-old with a flashlight for a soul. No one knew it yet, but that night was no ordinary night. It was the night everything quietly, irrevocably began to change. It's strange how a warm bowl of soup can thaw more than frozen fingers. Sometimes it softens hearts we didn't know were still beating. Oodoo. They sat around that corner table longer than they should have. Ava didn't want to leave, neither did Caleb. And Ethan, he was already halfway through drawing Ava into his world with crayons stolen from the waitress's apron and questions that made even the most guarded adult let down their armor. It wasn't the soup, it wasn't the snow, or the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was the stillness, the kind you only find when the noise in your life finally pauses. Ethan slurped the last of his soup and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "Come on, Dad. Tell the story. You know, the one with the robot and the microwave that became best friends." Caleb gave him a look. "I thought we retired that one." Ethan shook his head. "Ava hasn't heard it." Ava smiled, intrigued. "Microwave long story," Caleb muttered. "I've got time." Caleb sighed, surrendering with a soft grin. "All right. Once upon a time, in a junkyard that never slept, there was a robot who couldn't speak." And for the next 10 minutes, he told it. A ridiculous, funny, heartfelt little tale of loneliness and unlikely friendship. Ava laughed, really laughed at the robot's tin can heart and the microwave's existential crisis. But it wasn't just the story. It was watching Caleb talk to his son like he mattered. Like every word Ethan said was worth something. It hit her harder than she expected. She looked down into her cup and whispered almost to herself, "He's lucky to have you." Caleb didn't respond right away. He kept stirring his spoon eyes focused on the liquid like it held answers he didn't want to face. "I'm the lucky one," he said eventually. "He saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't recognize." Their eyes met again. Something deep passed between them, unspoken but felt. Then Ethan ruined the moment the way children do best. "My dad also cries when he thinks I'm asleep." Caleb groaned. "Ethan, I'm just saying, you're not alone." "Ava." She chuckled, but the words landed like a feather that carried 1,000 bricks. "You're not alone." She hadn't heard that in years. Oh. The wind hit them hard when they stepped back outside. Ava pulled her coat tighter around her, but she barely felt the cold. There was something else simmering under her skin. A longing she hadn't acknowledged in a long, long time. Connection, not charity, not performance, just presence. "Your place nearby?" Caleb asked, casual, polite. She hesitated. then answered truthfully. Penthouse on West 57th. Overlooks the park. The quiet, kind of expensive. Ethan's jaw dropped. You live in the sky, Ava laughed. Something like that? Can we see it? Caleb warned, but Ava's voice was soft. It's okay. It's a fair question. She paused, then added, I've got 3 bedrooms and more silence than I know what to do with. Honestly, I'd love some noise. Caleb studied her. You sure? She nodded. Just for a bit, she said more to herself than to them. Just. So, I don't forget what real laughter sounds like. Amo. The elevator ride to the penthouse was like something from another planet. Ethan pressed every button just to see what would happen. Ava let him. The doors opened to a space so pristine, so polished it looked untouched. Glass walls, white furniture, art that probably cost more than Caleb's annual income back when he had one, but no family photos, no clutter, no life. Where's your stuff? Ethan asked. Ava stood still like someone seeing her own space through a stranger's eyes for the first time. I guess I never stayed long enough to collect any. Ethan didn't understand, but Caleb did, and that hurt more than he expected. They settled into the living room. Ava brought out juice for Ethan, coffee for Caleb, and sat down across from them like it was the first time she'd truly invited someone into her space. Ethan lay on the rug, drawing galaxies with crayons. Caleb sipped his coffee in silence. Ava spoke first. I almost jumped, she said. Caleb looked up. She didn't look ashamed, just tired. Earlier today, I stood at the edge of the rooftop garden. It's all glass, you know? Gorgeous view, perfect place to disappear. Ethan's hand paused over his paper, but he didn't look up. He just kept drawing. Ava continued, voice steady. I've had everything. Built an empire from nothing. Bought out companies, won awards, broke records. But today I realized I didn't know who I'd call if I got sick, or who'd notice if I didn't wake up. She looked at Caleb. And then your son walked up to me like it was the most normal thing in the world, as if I mattered. Caleb's voice was quiet. You do. She smiled, and it trembled. No one said that in a long time, not without wanting something in return. A long pause followed. The city buzzed far below, invisible behind the insulated glass. Then Ethan spoke, still lying on the rug. If you fall, you don't disappear. You just land somewhere different. Ava blinked. What do you mean? He shrugged. Dad says sometimes when things fall apart, it's just life rearranging itself. For something better. Caleb reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. That's right. Ava stared at them. This father and son who had almost nothing but somehow had everything. She whispered, I don't even know how to be around this. It's been so long since I wasn't performing. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then said the words that would stay with her forever. You don't have to be anything here. Just be. And for the first time in years, Ava allowed herself to believe it might be possible. Not tomorrow, not next month, but maybe tonight. She stood and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. Snow was falling harder now, dancing past the lights of the city like little sparks of grace. Behind her, Ethan laughed at something in his drawing. Caleb offered her a second cup of coffee. And the silence in her penthouse for the first time. It didn't feel lonely. It felt shared. And that changed everything. Sometimes the most meaningful meals aren't served on fine china, but on a quiet table where no one pretends to be okay. Oh, Ava didn't know what possessed her to say it. It slipped out between the clink of cups and the hush of snowfall outside her window. One of those sentences that leaves your mouth before your mind can protest. Stay for dinner. Caleb looked up from his coffee. Ethan stopped coloring mid-rocket ship. Ava stood by the kitchen island now, barefoot, nervously running a hand through her golden hair like she wasn't quite sure she'd just invited 2 strangers to dine in her pristine penthouse. But the words were out. and for once she didn't want to take them back. "Are you sure?" Caleb asked cautiously. Ava nodded. "I don't remember the last time someone ate here. It'd be nice to cook for someone." Caleb hesitated, eyes flicking to Ethan. The boy was already nodding with wild enthusiasm. "She has a fridge full of stuff, Dad. Like real stuff. Not just peanut butter and crackers." Ava chuckled. "I might even have garlic bread." Ethan gasped, eyes wide. "This is the best day of my life." Caleb gave a reluctant smile. "Well, guess we're staying." Ava's kitchen came alive in a way it hadn't in years. Not with music, not with tech, but with voices, with noise, with life. Ethan pulled a stool over and offered to help. His version of helping involved aggressively tearing open a bag of shredded cheese and tossing it like confetti. Ava didn't mind. In fact, she found herself laughing. A genuine, belly-deep laugh that startled her so much she had to lean on the counter to catch her breath. "I haven't laughed like that in forever," she admitted. Caleb, chopping vegetables, glanced over. "Maybe you just forgot how." She met his gaze and held it. "Maybe I did." Ojo dinner was simple. Spaghetti with too much sauce, slightly burnt garlic bread, and a salad Ethan claimed credit for because he ripped the lettuce. But it tasted like a feast. Not because of what it was, but because of who it was with. They sat around her dining table, Ava at the head, Caleb to the right, Ethan to the left, and for the first time the space didn't feel cavernous. It felt just big enough to hold 3 stories that had never meant to cross. Ethan twirled his pasta and asked, "So what do you do, Ava? Like, for work?" Caleb opened his mouth to interrupt, maybe to stop Ethan from being too forward, but Ava held up a hand. "It's okay." She took a sip of water, thoughtful. "I used to build things. Companies, mostly. Apps, platforms. Some of them worked. Some of them didn't. Then one day I looked up and realized I'd built everything except a life." Caleb's fork paused midair. "That's a hard thing to realize." Ava nodded slowly. "It's lonelier than it sounds." Ethan looked up. "But you're not alone tonight." Ava smiled, a soft, almost shy smile. "No, I'm not." They kept eating. Stories flowed more freely now. Caleb told them about his job before the layoffs, how he used to fix smart thermostats and ended up reprogramming an entire apartment complex because the system kept turning on the oven instead of the heat. Ava laughed so hard she had to put her fork down. "Wait, did you seriously almost bake someone instead of warming the apartment?" Caleb grinned. "No one died, but there were a lot of burnt cookies." Ethan jumped in. "And I had to eat them so Dad wouldn't feel bad." "You're a hero," Ava said solemnly. "I know," Ethan said, puffing his chest. They laughed together, not forced, not polite, the kind that bubbles up when you stop trying to impress and just start being real. Then Ava grew quiet. "Can I tell you something strange?" Caleb leaned in slightly. "Sure. I didn't think I'd make it through this year. I had it all power money influence, but I felt invisible. Like none of it mattered. And then, your son sat next to me on a subway bench and asked if I was okay." She turned to Ethan. "And it wasn't just the question. It was that you saw me. Really saw me." Ethan shrugged. "You looked like you needed a friend." Caleb's voice was low. "He's got a radar for lonely." Ava's eyes softened. "Well, tell your radar it saved a life today." Silence fell over the table, not awkward, but heavy. Sacred. Like they all understood something unspoken had just shifted. Oh. After dinner, Ethan sprawled across the couch, full and content. Ava cleared the table while Caleb dried dishes beside her. It was so domestic, so normal, that it almost felt like they'd done it 100 times. She handed him a plate. "You're good with him." "I try. He trusts you. Completely." Caleb nodded. "I had to earn it. When his mom left, he stopped talking for months. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't sleep." Ava's hands stilled in the sink. "I'm sorry." Caleb looked down, then back up at her. "It taught me something, though. Kids don't need perfect, they need present. Big difference. Ava nodded slowly as if memorizing it. Present, not perfect. Caleb smiled. Exactly. Oh, so later. Ethan fell asleep on the couch, curled under a throw blanket Ava hadn't even realized she owned. She and Caleb stood by the window watching the snowfall. The city lights below shimmered like broken stars. Ava broke the silence. Thank you for not judging me. Caleb turned to her. For what? For being someone with everything who still managed to fall apart. He was quiet for a moment, then said something she would never forget. Sometimes it's not about how far you fall. It's about who's there when you land. Her throat tightened. You really believe that he looked at her steady and sure? I have to. She didn't say anything else, just stood beside him, her shoulder barely brushing his, and let the quiet settle. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't romance. It was two people, both a little broken, sharing space in a world that had stopped making room. And for Ava, that was more intimate than any love story she'd ever known. You can have 1,000 rooms and still feel like you're living in a cage until someone walks in and calls it home. Ozio. The next morning, the penthouse felt different. Not colder, not quieter, but alive. There were faint footprints in the kitchen where Ethan had spilled juice and cleaned it up with paper towels too thin to matter. A dish left on the counter. A crayon on the floor. Small signs, but powerful. Like the apartment had finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. Ava stood at the edge of the living room, barefoot, robe tied loosely, holding a mug of untouched coffee. She wasn't staring out the window the way she used to. Not today. Today she was watching the couch. Ethan was curled up, mouth slightly open, hugging a pillow like it owed him money. Caleb slept on the adjacent sofa, still wearing yesterday's hoodie, one arm thrown over his eyes. And yet, there was peace. The kind money couldn't buy. The kind no designer could arrange. Ava had had chefs, chauffeurs, advisors, and assistants, but never guests who made her home feel like it was theirs. She took a slow sip of her coffee and whispered to herself, so this is what real feels like. Odio. Later that morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls. Caleb stirred awake, blinking at the brightness before catching Ava watching him. Morning, he mumbled, sitting up. Good morning, she said. Sorry, I didn't mean to stare. I've never seen anyone sleep that hard on a $12,000 sofa. He grinned. I once slept on a pile of cables in a server room. This is luxury. Ava chuckled, then hesitated. You don't have to go. I mean, not yet. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Ethan's got school tomorrow. I should probably get him back to his routine. Of course, she said quickly, her voice steady, but her heart dipped before she could stop it. She wasn't ready for the quiet to return. As if hearing her thoughts, Ethan shuffled into the room, hair wild, wearing one of Ava's oversized t-shirts like a tunic. He rubbed his eyes, looked around, and asked the most casual, devastating question Ava had ever heard. Do we live here now? She blinked, stunned. No, honey, she said gently. This was just a sleepover. Ethan frowned, clearly disappointed. Oh, he said, then added, it's just, this place didn't feel empty last night. Ava swallowed hard. She turned away, pretending to tidy a stack of untouched magazines. I know, she whispered. Later, Caleb helped Ethan get dressed in the guest bathroom. Ava waited in the kitchen, pacing like a storm was building inside her. When Caleb emerged, backpack in one hand, he paused. I wanted to thank you, he said, voice sincere, for letting us stay. For the food, the stories, everything. You don't have to thank me, she said. Still, he continued. You didn't have to open your door to two strangers. You weren't strangers, she replied, then corrected herself. Not after that first bowl of soup? A brief silence. Then Caleb said, You sure you're okay? Going back to all this quiet. Ava stared at him for a long time, then gave a small, sad smile. I used to think silence meant strength. Now I realize it just meant no one was listening. He nodded. If you ever need someone to listen, you'll bring the microwave and the robot. Caleb laughed surprised. Only if there's garlic bread. Ava grinned. Deal. 000. As they reached the elevator, Ava walked them out. Ethan turned and said seriously, "You should come visit us next time, but our apartment's not fancy, just has stairs, and a grumpy cat named Beans." Ava bent down and ruffled his hair. "I'd love that." He stared at her, then reached into his pocket and handed her something small, a red plastic army man. "It's my bravest soldier. He protects people who are scared." Ava froze, blinking away tears. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Ethan replied. "Just don't let him get bored." The elevator dinged. Caleb nodded at Ava. "We'll see you around." And just like that, they were gone. The doors closed. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was waiting. Sue. That evening, Ava walked through her penthouse with different eyes. The living room felt too neat, the fridge too full. The guest room where Ethan had left a drawing taped to the nightstand felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for noise to return. She picked up the drawing. A stick figure version of Ava, Caleb, and Ethan, all standing under a sun with the words, "A real family has spaghetti together." She pressed the paper to her chest, sat down on the edge of the bed, and did something she hadn't done in a long, long time. She let herself miss them, and missing them didn't feel weak. It felt human. 3 days passed. Ava found herself checking her phone more often than usual. No new messages. She thought of texting Caleb, but what would she say? "Hi, I'm not used to missing people, but I seem to miss you too much. Too soon." Instead, she distracted herself with meetings, reports, shallow brunches with people who didn't ask real questions and didn't expect real answers. But it didn't work. Every elevator ride felt emptier. Every evening, too still. She missed Ethan's commentary on frozen pizza commercials. Missed Caleb's dry humor. Missed hearing footsteps that weren't her own. And on the fourth night, while preparing a microwave dinner she had no intention of eating, her phone buzzed. "Caleb, Ethan wants to know if you're free for another spaghetti night. He promised not to throw cheese this time." Ava didn't respond immediately. She stared at the screen, heart racing. Then finally she typed, "Ava, only if I get to bring dessert. Some people walk into your life like a whisper and end up echoing in every room of your soul." Oso spaghetti night. Nurse 2 was messier, louder, and far more sacred than Ava had expected. This time, it wasn't in her penthouse. It was in Caleb's small second-floor apartment in Queens, a modest space that smelled of lemon soap, burnt toast, and the unmistakable comfort of lived-in love. The walls were off-white, slightly chipped in places. The carpet had a few stains that told their own stories. And the kitchen. The kitchen was the size of Ava's walk-in closet. But for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she felt safer here than in any boardroom she had ever commanded. Ethan met her at the door barefoot and beaming, holding up a hand-drawn menu written in crayon. "Tonight's specials," he announced, "are spaghetti with extra magic, Dad's garlic bread, and mystery jello." Ava laughed. "Should I be worried about the mystery part?" Ethan whispered. "It jiggles a lot, as if that somehow explained it." Caleb appeared behind him, towel slung over one shoulder, sleeves rolled up. "You made it," he said. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Ava replied, and meant every word. Shio. The kitchen was chaos in the best way. Pots clanged. Bread nearly burned again. Ethan narrated every step like he was hosting a cooking show. Ava chopped herbs badly, and Caleb teased her about her tech CEO knife skills. They were a team. They weren't trying to impress each other anymore. They were just being. "I've never cooked like this before," Ava admitted as she stirred the sauce. "Usually someone else does everything. I just show up with perfect hair and a tight schedule." "Well, Caleb said your hair's still perfect, but your sauce needs more salt." She tossed a pinch over her shoulder dramatically. "For luck?" Wrong shoulder, Ethan chimed in. Now we're doomed. Ava laughed so hard she had to sit down. Ojogo dinner was loud. There was slurping. There was storytelling. There were second helpings and napkins used as capes. At one point, Caleb told a joke so dry Ava nearly choked on her water. I swear you practice those, she said, wiping tears of laughter. I practice not telling them, he replied. You're just special. It wasn't flirtatious. It was true. And that truth stirred something in her. As the plates emptied and Ethan ran to his room to grab his Jell-O masterpiece, Ava leaned back in her chair, eyes on Caleb. This, she said quietly, feels more like success than anything I've built. Caleb didn't respond right away. He just looked at her with that steady, quiet gaze she'd come to recognize, not judging, not assuming, just seeing. Success isn't what you build, he said. It's what you're willing to protect. She nodded slowly. And I never protected me. I protected my company, my brand, my numbers, but not the part of me that feels or hurts or hopes. You're doing it now, he said. A pause, a breath. Then Ava asked the question she hadn't dared ask out loud until now. Do you think I'm too late? Caleb leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. I think the people who ask that question are exactly the ones who aren't. 0-0. The Jell-O was terrible. It wobbled like a dying star and tasted vaguely like grape and regret. Ava ate every bite. Caleb took a picture of her first spoonful, which she pretended to be angry about. Ethan declared it a culinary revolution. They ended the night sitting on the old couch. Ethan fell asleep with his head on Ava's lap, fingers tangled in her sleeve like he'd always known her. Caleb handed her a light blanket without saying a word. She draped it over Ethan, her fingers brushing his hair. Then she looked up and whispered, You've raised a good human. Caleb looked at her, his voice barely audible. He's the reason I never gave up. Ava nodded. Now he's the reason I started. They sat like that, not needing music or a movie, just the creak of an old fan, the ticking of a thrift store clock, and the kind of silence that heals more than words. Oh. Later, when she stood to leave, Ethan stirred. Are you going? I have to, sweetheart, she said, brushing his cheek. But I'll see you soon. He yawned. Promise, promise. As Caleb walked her to the door, she hesitated at the threshold. The hallway beyond felt too cold, too far away. She turned to him. I don't know what this is, she said, voice honest, raw. But I know I don't want it to stop. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked at her with something real in his eyes and said, Then don't walk away from it. Oh. That night, Ava didn't cry. She didn't scroll through emails or check headlines. She sat in bed holding the crayon menu Ethan had given her and smiled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like she'd landed. And that changed everything. Sometimes it's not life that breaks you. It's the eyes. Watching, judging, deciding your worth without ever knowing your story. You go. The photo went viral within 36 hours. It started as a candid Ethan in Ava's arms, both of them laughing in front of a hot dog cart near Central Park. A bystander snapped the picture because it was wholesome and posted it with a harmless enough caption. Is that Ava Sinclair, who's the kid? It spread like wildfire. Speculation spiraled out of control. Was it her son? A secret adoption? A hidden scandal? And who was the man she'd been seen walking beside that same evening holding the child's backpack? The internet didn't ask, it decided. Sinclair's secret trended. Power and poor boy. Billionaire and the janitor. Because someone dug into Caleb's LinkedIn profile, found his employment history, his layoffs, his last known address, his divorce, and just like that, they had a story. Disgraced CEO courts single dad in strange public redemption arc. Billionaire heiress spotted playing house with technician and child. Real or PR stunt, Ava found out the way everyone finds out bad news about themselves these days through her assistant's panicked call and 482 unread notifications. She stood, frozen in her kitchen, the kettle screaming on the stove phone vibrating endlessly on the counter beside her. All she could whisper was "Nomo zero." Meanwhile, Caleb was walking Ethan home from school blissfully unaware. They were kicking pebbles down the sidewalk, Ethan telling him a wild tale about a T-Rex who became a ballet dancer. "I'm telling you, Dad, he wore a tutu and everything." "Big tail must have made pirouettes difficult," Caleb replied with a grin. But when they got to the apartment building, he noticed the silence. Neighbors stared through their peepholes. One woman actually backed away when they walked in. By the time they reached their door, there were 2 envelopes taped to it. One was a notice from the landlord. The other, a tabloid cover. The headline read, "Sleeping Her Way to Redemption. Ava Sinclair's new charity case. Has a name." And there was his face. Caleb's. Front page. His blood ran cold. Odo Ava called that night. Caleb didn't answer. She tried again. Nothing. The 3rd time, Ethan picked up. "Hi, Ava," he chirped. "Dad's not talking. He's kind of broken." She closed her eyes, heart-twisting. "Can you tell him I didn't know? That I didn't want this? I'll try," Ethan said. "But when Dad gets quiet like this, it takes more than words to fix." She knew he was right. She also knew she couldn't fix it from afar. You. The next morning, Ava was standing outside their apartment building wearing a hoodie, no makeup, and more fear in her eyes than she'd ever let the public see. Caleb opened the door. His face was hard, tired, wounded. "I just needed a minute," he said. "I know," she whispered. "Can I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment felt smaller today, not because of the space but because of the weight in the air. She sat on the edge of the couch. Caleb stayed standing. "Was any of this real?" he asked, voice flat. The question stung. "Yes," she answered, her voice cracking. "More real than anything in my life." "Then why does it feel like I was just a moment in your PR recovery? Because the world doesn't know what to do with something real," she said. "So it turns it into a headline." He looked at her. "All I ever wanted was for Ethan to be proud of me. Not pitied, not mocked. Proud." Ava swallowed. "Then let him see you fight through this. Let him see that none of those words define you." "And what about you?" Caleb asked. "What do you want him to see when he looks at you?" A long silence. Then she whispered, "Someone who didn't run away this time." O0 Ethan came out of his room rubbing his eyes. When he saw Ava, he ran over and hugged her without hesitation. "I missed you," he mumbled. "I missed you too, sweetheart." He looked up at both of them. "Are you guys fighting?" Ava crouched down to his level. "We're trying to figure out how to not fight." Ethan nodded sagely. "Mom and Dad used to fight with loud words. You guys fight with quiet. That one hurt, but it was honest." And Ava reached for Caleb's hand, hesitant, shaking, and when he didn't pull away, something shifted. Not a fix, but a choice. To rebuild together. Oduo. That night, the 3 of them sat on the roof of the building. It wasn't a penthouse, just a patch of concrete, some rusted chairs, and a view of the city lights. It was enough. Ethan had brought up his blanket and toy flashlight. Caleb brought old cocoa mix in mismatched mugs. Ava brought silence, and filled it with truth. "When I was younger, she said I thought love was something you earned by being perfect. Now I know. It's something you build by showing up." Caleb looked at her. "And staying." She nodded. "Yes, staying." Ethan, already dozing in her lap, murmured, "You can stay." Ava kissed his hair and whispered, "I will." O-zo-o. The world didn't stop spinning the next day, but something inside them did. The storm quieted not because it disappeared, but because they chose to stand in it together. No longer as strangers, not as a billionaire and a technician, but as something far rarer. People who stayed. Some storms don't end with thunder. They end with silence. And it's in that silence that we decide who we are. EU. For 2 days, Ava didn't go outside. Not because she was hiding, but because she needed to feel everything without anyone watching. She read every headline, every comment, every thread where strangers tore apart her character like they were shredding old receipts. They analyzed her smile, her tone, her motives. Some called her a manipulator. Some called her a martyr. No one called her human. She turned off her phone, canceled meetings, pulled down the blinds, and sat on the floor of her penthouse barefoot in silence. It was the first time in her adult life she allowed herself to stop performing. And in that stillness, a single truth began to echo louder than any accusation. If love isn't brave, it's not real. And she wasn't going to run from real anymore. Whoa. Across town, Caleb returned to work. It wasn't glamorous. Just a temp gig fixing security panels in an old apartment complex. But it gave him back something he hadn't realized he'd lost. Dignity. He came home late, hands calloused, face dusty. Ethan met him at the door with a crayon drawing of Ava riding a dinosaur in a business suit. "She's fierce," Ethan declared proudly. Caleb smiled, crouching beside his son. "You really like her, huh?" Ethan nodded. "She's the first grown-up who listens all the way to the end." That one landed hard. Caleb ruffled Ethan's hair. "I like her, too." Ooh. That weekend, Ava showed up at the community library wearing jeans and sneakers, holding 2 paper bags filled with donated books and hot cocoa mix. No reporters followed her. No photographers cared. She wasn't news anymore. She was just a woman trying to figure out what it meant to stay. And that was everything. The librarian smiled at her. "We haven't seen you since you donated the new tablet station." Ava smiled back, but this time not as a donor, just as a neighbor. "I'm here to read today. Do you mind if I join story hour?" The librarian blinked. No one's ever asked that. They usually just drop off books. "Well," Ava said, glancing at the corner where a group of wiggly kids sat cross-legged on carpet squares, "I think I finally have something worth reading." She pulled out a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, the same one her nanny used to read when Ava was 5. And as she opened to the first page, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "Maybe being some pig doesn't mean being perfect, just loved." Later that night, she stood outside Caleb's door. No announcement, no call ahead, just her, holding a container of soup and a borrowed heart. Caleb opened the door. He didn't look surprised. "You okay?" Ava nodded. "I'm learning." He stepped aside. She walked in. The apartment was the same. A little warmer, a little messier, and now a little hers. Ethan squealed when he saw the soup. "This is my second favorite dinner," he shouted. "What's your first?" Ava asked. "Spaghetti night," he said, then grinned. "But that's not a food, that's a feeling." Ava smiled. "You're wiser than most CEOs I know." "Obviously," Ethan said. Yerwo. After dinner, Ava helped Caleb wash dishes. She rolled up her sleeves. Didn't mind when water splashed her sweater. At one point, Caleb said softly, "You could have walked away." "Most people would have." "I've done enough walking," she replied. "It's time I learn how to stay still." He nodded. "I was scared, you know." "I know. I still am." She paused, then said, "So am I. But maybe the bravest thing we do is stay anyway." Caleb turned, looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not the woman from headlines, not the heiress, not the fixer, but just Ava. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the one who needed saving. He felt like someone worth choosing. 0:00 later. Ethan climbed into bed, clutching his flashlight like a sword. "Will you tell me a story?" he asked Ava. "Sure. What kind?" "Tell me one where the hero doesn't have superpowers. Just heart." She looked at him. Then she began. Once upon a time, there was a woman who built castles in the sky but forgot what it felt like to dance in the dirt. One day she met a boy who made her laugh and a man who saw her before she could disappear. Ethan's eyelids drooped. She tried to give them gifts, but all they really wanted was her. A soft yawn. And slowly she realized she was enough. Oh. When Caleb walked her to the door that night, they didn't say much, but just before she stepped into the hallway, he stopped her. Ava. She turned. I'm not used to happy endings. She smiled. Then let's not end it. Caleb searched her face. What do we do instead? She reached for his hand. We keep writing. And together, they did. Sometimes healing doesn't ask for applause. It just asks you to show up quietly, consistently, with your whole heart. Whoa. It had been exactly 24 days since spaghetti night turned from a meal into a memory Ava couldn't stop returning to. 24 days of showing up not as a billionaire, not as a fixer, not as a woman trying to prove something, but as someone willing to be with no mask, no script. She'd come over with soup and stayed for bedtime stories. Brought books, not bouquets, became someone Ethan ran to, not someone people stood back from. But tonight felt different. She stood outside Caleb's apartment holding a folded piece of paper, her fingers trembling in a way that had nothing to do with cold. This wasn't a visit. It was a question. She knocked twice. Caleb opened the door, eyebrows raised. You okay? She nodded. I found something. Something I want to share. He stepped aside. Come in. Ethan peeked out from his room. Is it more Jell-O? No Jell-O? She smiled, but something better. I hope. H-O-J-O. The three of them sat on the couch, Ava between them, the paper now unfolded in her lap. It's an idea, she began. A program for kids. Like Ethan, like I used to be. Smart, curious, undervalued. Caleb leaned in. What kind of program? She handed him the page. STEM scholarships, workshops in underserved neighborhoods. Not just money, but mentorship too. Ethan leaned over his dad's shoulder. Do I get to teach? Ava laughed. Only if you promise not to grade anyone on their coloring skills. Ethan gave a thumbs up. Deal. Caleb looked at her. This is incredible. She hesitated. There's more. I want to name it after Ethan. Caleb's expression froze. I didn't ask because it was cute, she said softly. I asked because he reminded me why I started. Because he saw me when I was invisible, and that kind of light. It deserves a legacy. Caleb stared at the page, then at her, then down at his son who was now pretending to teach math to a stuffed dinosaur. And for a moment, Caleb's heart swelled in a way he didn't expect. Why us? He asked, voice low. Ava's eyes filled but didn't spill. Because you didn't need me to be extraordinary. You just needed me to stay, and I never knew how much I needed to be needed without conditions. He looked away, trying to keep his breath steady, then reached out and touched her hand. Okay, he said simply. Let's build it. 000. 3 weeks later, the Ethan Initiative launched quietly, no press release, no gala, no designer dresses. Just kids, teachers, laptops, pizza. It was everything Ava had hoped, everything she hadn't known how to want before. She wore jeans and spoke at the first workshop without a microphone, kneeling on the floor beside the kids as they tested circuits and coded their first apps. Caleb watched from the back, Ethan on his lap, both of them beaming. Afterward, as the room emptied, Ava sat on a folding chair, exhausted but glowing. Caleb handed her a bottle of water. You did good today. She looked up at him. We did good. Oko. That night, Ava cooked for them for the first time. Not a chef, not takeout, just her. Lasagna, slightly overbaked. Garlic knots. A salad Ethan refused to touch. Cooking is hard, she muttered. Now you understand spaghetti night trauma, Caleb said. They laughed, and Ethan announced he was writing a cookbook titled Burnt But Loved. After dinner, while Ethan drew comics at the table, Ava and Caleb stood at the sink. He washed. She dried. It felt sacred, unremarkable in its rhythm, unforgettable in its meaning. "You've changed," Caleb said suddenly. Ava raised a brow. "In a good way. In a real way." She turned to him, voice soft. "Do you ever wonder how much of yourself you had to lose to become who you are now?" Caleb nodded. "Sometimes. But maybe we don't lose ourselves. Maybe we just get peeled back, until what's left is what matters most." Ava looked down at the dish in her hand, then up at him. "I'm glad you're still standing," he smiled, "only because you reached back." Ozoho. Later that evening, Ava walked into Ethan's room to say goodnight. He was already under the covers holding his flashlight. "Tell me something true," he said. Ava sat beside him. "Like what's something you were scared to say before?" She thought for a long moment, then whispered, "I used to think being alone meant I was strong. Now I know being seen and staying seen takes more courage." Ethan reached for her hand under the blanket. "You're doing good," he said sleepily, "even when the garlic knots are scary." She kissed his forehead, laughing through her tears. "I love you, kid." "Love you more," he mumbled. Osio. When she returned to the living room, Caleb was waiting with 2 mugs of tea and a look that said, "We're not done yet." They sat quietly sipping. Then he said, "Do you still feel invisible?" She shook her head. "No, but I feel transparent. Like people can finally see who I really am. Is that scary? It used to be. Now, it feels like peace." He reached for her hand again. "You're not just seen, Ava. You're known." She looked at him, really looked, and whispered, "So are you." Osu. That night, no one spoke of the future, but it hung in the air, soft, open, full of breath. It wasn't a promise. It was something better, a beginning. There are wounds people never see until someone is brave enough to sit beside them, not to fix, but to understand. Oziroho. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Ava finally let herself tell the truth. Not to a boardroom, not to a camera, but to the one person who never asked her to be anything more than herself. They were at the park, the same bench where Ethan had first offered her a smile and changed the trajectory of her life. This time, Ava was the one holding the paper bag of sandwiches. Caleb was the one quiet, thoughtful, waiting. And Ethan, he was chasing pigeons like a professional bird negotiator. "I used to come here alone." Ava began unwrapping a sandwich she didn't intend to eat. "Back before the headlines. Back before you." Caleb listened, arms resting on his knees. "I'd sit right here pretending I was just another face in the city. But I wasn't pretending very well. My clothes, my phone, my driver waiting around the corner. They screamed that I didn't belong here. Not really." "You wanted to, though," Caleb said gently. She nodded. "More than I wanted the next promotion. More than I wanted another zero in my bank account." A pause. A breath. "Back then, I was successful, but never safe. People admired me, but no one really chose me, not when I stopped being useful." Caleb looked over. "I chose you before I knew who you were." Ava smiled. "Exactly." Ozo. They sat in silence, the kind that feels more like a conversation than words ever could. Then she whispered, "I want to tell you about my father." Caleb nodded. "I'm listening." Ava exhaled, and it came out shaky. He was brilliant, cold, unshakable. I used to think that was power, being untouchable, unemotional. But I didn't realize it was just fear, with a tie and a title. She picked at the edge of her sandwich. "I spent my life chasing his approval. Then, one day, I realized I'd become the exact kind of woman he respected because I'd buried every part of myself he didn't." Her voice dropped brittle. "When the scandal hit, when everything crumbled, I expected him to call, to explain, to defend me." Caleb watched her carefully. "But he didn't," she said. "Not once." "And did you forgive him?" Caleb asked softly. "I wanted to," she whispered, "but I never got the chance. He died before I could decide." Silence again. Then Caleb said something so gently, so deeply, it stayed with her long after the moment passed. Maybe the real forgiveness isn't for them. Maybe it's what we give ourselves, so we can keep growing without them. Ava blinked away the sting in her eyes. "You always know what to say." "No," Caleb said. "I just stopped being afraid of saying what's true." 0 That night, back at the apartment, Ava stayed for dinner again. Ethan insisted on making toast with smiley faces drawn in jam. Caleb tried to make grilled cheese and accidentally burned the first one. Ava laughed so hard she almost dropped the plate. "You guys are a disaster in the kitchen," she teased. "Disasters make the best memories," Caleb replied, tossing the burnt sandwich like it was a trophy. After dinner, Ava tucked Ethan in reading the next chapter of a book they'd started together. When she finished, Ethan blinked sleepily. "Ava, yes, sweetheart. Did you always know you'd find us?" She smiled, brushing his hair back. "No. But maybe you were always finding me." He grinned and curled closer to his blanket. "I'm glad I did." 8 later, Caleb and Ava sat by the window, the city glowing quietly beyond the glass. She looked at him. "Do you ever miss the version of you before the pain?" Caleb thought for a long moment. "No," he said, "because that version didn't know how strong I could be." Ava nodded. "Me neither." They sat shoulder to shoulder, the kind of closeness that no longer needed permission. Then Ava whispered, almost afraid of her own voice, "I think I'm falling in love with this life." Caleb turned to her, eyes warm. "This life," he echoed, "or us in it?" She met his gaze, steady now. "Both." He didn't kiss her then, not yet, but his hand found hers, fingers lacing together with a kind of quiet certainty, and it was enough. More than enough. 2 days later, they visited a women's shelter together. One Ava had donated to for years anonymously. This time she walked in with Caleb and Ethan beside her. She wasn't just the donor, she was present. The staff greeted her with confusion at first, then welcome. A little girl with messy braids clung to Ava's leg within minutes. "She thinks you're a movie star," the coordinator said. Ava knelt down and whispered to the girl, "I'm not, but I used to be very lost. And then I met someone who smiled at me when no one else did." "Did it fix everything?" the girl asked. Ava shook her head gently. "No, but it reminded me that I was still worth finding." Caleb watched from across the room, holding Ethan's backpack in one hand, his heart in the other. That's when he knew. He wasn't falling for her anymore. He'd already fallen, and he never wanted to get back up. Sometimes it's not about becoming someone new. It's about finally being seen as who you've been all along. 0 The gala was never meant to be a stage for healing. It was a fundraiser, polished, elegant, safe, everything Ava Sinclair used to master. The ballroom at the Grand Metropolitan sparkled with crystal chandeliers and $1,000 centerpieces. Guests wore silk and ambition, the kind of night where everyone smiled too widely and said things they didn't mean. Ava hadn't attended an event like this in nearly a year, not since the scandal, not since them. But tonight she walked in, not alone, not rehearsed, and not to prove a thing. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, no diamonds, no designer entourage, just confidence stitched from quiet nights and laughter that healed instead of impressed. Caleb stood beside her in a black suit borrowed from a friend. He adjusted the collar like it didn't quite belong. "You sure about this?" he murmured, eyes scanning the room. "No," she whispered, then smiled. "But I'm not hiding anymore." Ethan, back home with a babysitter, had given her his favorite marble for luck. If anyone's mean, he'd said seriously, "Just hold this and remember your magic." So she kept the marble tucked in her purse, a small round secret reminding her that truth could outshine everything, especially glass chandeliers. They weren't 5 steps into the room before someone approached. Ava. My God, look at you glowing. Is it true what they said? About the program, the single dad, the kid? It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was curious. The way people talk when they're hungry for your story but not your truth. Ava offered a polite smile. Yes, it's true, and it's the best decision I ever made. The woman blinked. Oh, she said, unsure how to respond. Well, brave of you. Caleb leaned in as they walked away. She said that like you adopted a wild bear. Ava laughed. To be fair, Ethan does growl when he doesn't get enough pancakes. OZOO dinner passed in a blur of speeches and applause. Ava received an award unexpected glass too sharp for her taste. She accepted it with grace, but her real pride wasn't in her hands. It was sitting in her heart. It was knowing who she was even if the world still tried to redefine her. Later in the evening, as the band played soft jazz and couples moved onto the dance floor, Ava took a moment to slip away. Caleb found her near the balcony looking out over the city skyline. She didn't turn when he approached. I always thought this view meant I'd made it, she said softly. But it never made me feel grounded. He stepped beside her. And now she looked up at him. Now it reminds me of everything I almost missed trying to get here. Caleb didn't say anything, just reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, the crayon menu from their first spaghetti night. I laminated it, he said with a half grin. Figured we'd need the original if we ever franchised. Ava laughed, tears threatening. You kept it. I keep everything that makes me feel home. She reached for his hand. You know, she said, voice trembling slightly, I used to think love had to be earned, and kept through effort. And now he asked. She looked him straight in the eye. Now I think real love is what stays when the lights turn off and there's nothing left to perform. He leaned in, resting his forehead gently against hers. That's the kind I want, he whispered, the kind that sees every version of me and stays anyway. Then, stay, she said. He smiled. I already have. OZOO. A week later, Ava stood at the community center gym, now converted into a buzzing hub for the Ethan Initiative's first public showcase. Kids showed off solar cars, app demos, and hand-built robots made from old blender parts. In the center of the room, surrounded by reporters and parents, stood Ethan holding a microphone almost as tall as him. Hi, he began, voice cracking. My name's Ethan, and this is my project. But I also want to tell you a story. A hush fell. Once my dad and I didn't have much, but then I met this lady who was really rich, really sad, and really lonely. A few chuckles, but then she had spaghetti with us, and she wasn't sad anymore, and she helped me build this, and I helped her remember that she's already enough. He held up the robot. It's not perfect, but it works. He looked over at Ava, who stood frozen in place, and she's kind of like that, too. Everyone clapped, but Ava didn't hear them. All she heard was the sound of her heart finally quiet, finally full. Caleb came up beside her, eyes proud and misty. I think your legacy just introduced himself. She nodded, whispering back. He didn't just save me. He reminded me that broken things still build, and sometimes they build something better than perfect ever could. A family isn't made by blood or by plans. It's made by the people who stay when life is messy and love when it's not easy. OZOO. The snow had started falling gently just after dusk. Not the kind that snarls traffic or ruins shoes, but the kind that hushes the world, that coats the air in something close to magic. From the windows of their little house in Queens, soft golden light spilled onto the sidewalk. The tree in the corner blinked lazily with mismatched ornaments and handmade stars, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted from the oven like a promise. Ava stood in the living room barefoot, wearing one of Caleb's flannel shirts over a white tee. She was stringing popcorn with Ethan, who kept eating every third piece. You know you're sabotaging this garland, she teased. It's called quality control, he said seriously, his fingers sticky with butter. From the kitchen, Caleb called out, "Is my sweater still alive, or did you two bury it under tinsel again?" Ava smirked and shouted back, "We respectfully retired it. It's now a tree skirt." Ethan giggled. "It was ugly, Dad. Let it go." Caleb emerged holding a tray of hot chocolate, eyebrows raised. "Remind me why I live with two rebels." Ava took a mug and raised it in salute. "Because we never let you drink cold coffee alone anymore." He grinned. "Best reason I've ever heard." They gathered on the couch, the three of them tucked under one large lumpy blanket that had somehow become sacred. Outside, the snowflakes kept falling. Inside, there was only warmth. Oju. After dinner, simple pasta, too much garlic bread, and Ethan's insistence on singing every carol off key, they moved to the fireplace. Ava lit the last candle on the windowsill. "This one's for beginnings," she said softly. Ethan tilted his head. "But it's the end of the year." "Exactly," Caleb added. "Endings and beginnings usually happen in the same breath." Ava looked around. At the modest furniture. At the photos on the wall, one of Ethan holding his STEM award, one of the three of them at the library story hour, one taken by a street artist in Central Park that Ethan had dubbed the day "Everything Started to Feel Right." She took a breath and said, "I've never felt more whole." Caleb wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You know what's wild?" he said. "What somewhere in a boardroom right now people are still using your name in strategy meetings, still debating what your comeback means." Ava smiled faintly. "And here I am, folding laundry-burning toast and arguing about which dinosaur would win in a lightsaber duel." Ethan piped up, "Still the Triceratops." Caleb rolled his eyes. "That's not even logical." "Emotion is logic," Ethan declared, crossing his arms like a philosopher. Ava laughed and leaned into Caleb's shoulder. "No one in that boardroom knows what I know now," she whispered, "which is—" She looked at him, her eyes bright, "that a quiet life filled with loud love is worth more than any empire I ever built." Ordu. Later, they exchanged gifts. Ethan gave Ava a necklace with a tiny marble inside. "So you never forget your magic," he said. Ava's throat tightened. Caleb handed her a wrapped box. Inside was a framed photo of the crayon menu from Spaghetti Night #1, next to a second photo of her speaking at the Ethan Initiative's first graduation. "There's who you were," he said, "and who you became." She looked at him. "They're the same," she whispered. "I just finally believed in her." Ava gave Caleb a leather-bound notebook. "I didn't write in it," she said, "because it's not mine to write. What is it? A place for the things we build next." He opened to the first page. 3 words in her handwriting, "Let's keep going." He kissed her, then, not with hesitation, but with the steady reverence of someone who'd watched her fall rise and still choose him. Ethan squealed and threw a pillow at them. Gross romantic stuff. They laughed together, the kind of laughter that didn't echo off ceilings but filled walls, the kind that left a mark. Oariuo. Just before midnight, they stepped outside, bundled in coats, Ava's hand warm in Caleb's, Ethan dancing circles in the snow. They stood on the stoop as fireworks bloomed in the distance, soft explosions painting the sky, gold and crimson. Ethan tossed confetti made of cut-up homework into the air and shouted, "Happy New Year." Caleb lifted him onto his shoulders. Ava leaned against them, both eyes closed for a moment, letting it sink in. The silence between booms was full of meaning, the kind of meaning that only comes from surviving the hard parts and choosing joy anyway. Caleb looked down at her and asked, "Are you ready for what's next?" She looked up. "No," she said, then smiled. "But that's how I know it's worth it." And as the sky lit up above them and the city whispered its way into a new year, they stood there, 3 hearts, 1 home. Not perfect, but true. Because the most extraordinary love stories don't end with a kiss. They end with a kitchen light left on, a quiet promise whispered over cocoa, a blanket big enough for 3. They end when someone stays, and begins again. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet dinner, one unexpected smile, to change the course of 3 lives forever. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We read everyone. And if you believe in the power of love, healing, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story waiting to move your heart. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and remember, the smallest gestures often carry the deepest love.